Entrepreneurship at another business school based in San Francisco that teaches out here called Presidio Graduate School. And what I do for my day job is running Fledge, which we call the Conscious Company Accelerator. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. So if you're in Seattle, if you're at UW, right, you know Startup Hall, and there's another accelerator works out of Startup Hall called TechStars. The best way to start a startup, lesson number one for startups is don't come up with a new idea, take someone else's, right? So I took the TechStar idea and I brought it over to the world of for-profit social good or mission-driven companies or conscious companies and copied it wholeheartedly and told them about this, and they were totally happy to see copycats. And that's what we do. We talk about the fact that we look for the best companies we can from all around the world that are mission-driven for-profits where the mission is embedded in the product or service. That's our long description of conscious companies. We invest in them, which is the TechStar model. We bring them to some city, and then we make them better. And we pay them to do this. Right? They don't pay us. We write them the check because we're investors. Right? And we've done this with 82 companies so far who themselves run in 22 different countries around the world. This is not just a Seattle program, it's a global program. We've had, I lost count already, 60-something of these companies here in Seattle. And then we started replicating this in other cities, so it does run in Lima, Peru. It's right now running in Barcelona, Spain, or Catalonia, depending on the week. And next year, it'll launch in Vancouver and University of Padua in Italy. Fun fact about University of Padua in Italy, second oldest university in Europe. It is so old, that's where Galileo went to school. Yeah, I love that fact. And then Lisbon just signed up. Thank you for the echo. Too loud, please. Lisbon just signed up. We'll hopefully get them up and running in 2019. All right, now the reason we need accelerators, the reason all these people are coming and talking to you about startups is that this doesn't happen. This is what gets written about in books and gets made into movies and whatnot. So, right, crazy bright kid is sitting as a Harvard freshman and comes up with this great idea and sits in a corner and writes it. And the next thing you know, he's got the 10th largest public company in the world. Right? That's happened twice, right? We can talk about that story twice. Yeah, didn't actually happen that way. That neither in the case of Facebook nor Microsoft are they in the business that kid was actually doing when he was a freshman. They did something else. What they found was that worked for a while, and then it didn't. And so they had to try something new, and that worked for a while, and then it didn't, and then hurdles showed up. And you make this mess of forward progress and backward progress and whatnot until if you're lucky, and luck is the biggest factor, you pop out the other end and everyone thinks you're an overnight success. Right? They don't see the mess, because the mess doesn't make a good story, so nobody talks about the mess. Right? But the fact is that if you name a company, I will tell you what more or less what their plan A was. If you name a famous public company, they're not doing plan A. They're doing plan B or plan C or plan D or plan E or plan F. Because plan A's almost never work. All right. Other thing you'll hear about in the tech world is disruption. I hear about this term all the time. In my world, we don't talk about that much, right? So this is the book that defined disruption, right? The Innovator's Dilemma. This is an older book. This is a book, anyone ever seen this book or read it? We got one, philosophy major?
No, it was science studies. I took a class on it.
Took a class, all right. So this book, everyone in the room has heard the term that was invented from this book. The term is paradigm. So I love to quote this book because everyone uses the word paradigm and no one actually knows what it means unless you've taken the class or a philosophy major. I live with a PhD from UW in philosophy, so she's taught me what this means. All right, so Thomas Kuhn is a historian of science, right? Not a businessman, not actually a philosopher. He's an historian, and he was looking at how science works in reality, right? Not the scientific method that you're taught, which is kind of wrong, right? In reality, what happens is that the scientists have a bunch of beliefs on what's true. For instance, it's true, if we were 400 years ago, it's true that the Earth is the center of the universe and that everything revolves around the Earth. Aristotle said that, Plato said that, right? The Pope said that. That was true. And any evidence that you showed that, oh, look, the moon is, yeah, that one seems to be going around, but these other things that we call the planets, they don't seem to be just going around. They go backwards sometimes. They seem to have some bumps on them. They're not perfect. Yeah, all that evidence is just thrown away. It's ignored because it doesn't fit the paradigm. Until one day, the paradigm shifts and absorbs all the new evidence because enough evidence is piled up, or because some idea shows up that just can't be refuted. Right? So Galileo, he suffered for pushing forward that paradigm that he did not invent. Right? Copernicus died before his stuff was published because he didn't want to get excommunicated. Now, why do I bring this up in the world of startups? Because you really have you have three choices. You can just copy something that's already working. I already mentioned that. Or you can try and bring something forward that truly disrupts an industry, which is rare. Right? So Uber has actually disrupted the taxi industry. Right? Google has brought something that's useful, but I don't know what they disrupted. Right? You go through the giant tech startups, most of them haven't actually disrupted anything. They've brought something brand new. They've in fact broken the paradigm. So if you go back and watch the Steve Jobs presentation in 2007 on this device that they were bringing to market, so I actually just watched this a month ago. He announced that Apple was was extremely excited to be announcing 3 products: a touchscreen iPod, a touchscreen iPod, an internet device, a brand new phone, and an internet device. And he repeated that over and over again: a touchscreen iPod, right? A brand new phone, and a breakthrough internet device. And he kept repeating it like 5 times until the audience started laughing and realized that he was talking about one device, right? And this changed the way we saw phones. Phones before this had buttons on it and small screens and keyboards and whatnot. So they didn't as much disrupt the phone market as change the paradigm of what a phone is. Right? All right, so what do you need to know how to do in order to do a startup? Right? I'm working with tons and tons of startups. Between all the different paths I have for helping startups, it's like 100 a year that I work with. I have a theory. The theory is you have to know at least 7 skills really well. And if you miss any of these skills, your odds of failing go up. And your odds of failing at a startup already start really high. Right? Half of all new companies are dead after 3 years. Right? We've seen that stat. The Kaufman Foundation tracks that stat and has for years. It gets worse when we talk about tech startups. 90% of venture capital startups don't succeed. It's actually a little higher than that. I think it's due to this. So I think that every entrepreneur needs to understand business strategy and tactics, something about design, something about marketing and sales and financial planning and accounting, how to do some fundraising, how to run the company, operations. And the theory goes that if you don't know how to do all those things, then they're not going to get done right. Simplest example is, how many people here have had a sales job? Yeah, so less than half the hands go up. So for the rest of you, what you don't understand yet is that almost everybody says no. It's really frustrating. The people who are doing sales are nodding right now. So a good sales rate, a good percentage of sales calls that end in a sale is 10%. That means you make 10 sales calls and 9 people tell you they don't want what you have. And if you're a founder of the company and you believe this is the next big disruptive paradigm shifting idea, that's frustrating because they're just blind and they're just not understanding this giant vision you have in front of them. And that's a good sales rate. A normal sales rate is more like 5 or 6 or 7%. So that's like 97 people or 98 people telling you no. Sorry, 95 people telling you no. Right out of 100. It's really frustrating. Right? So if you don't expect that and you don't know how to deal with that, you will not make those sales. You will give up after 50 sales calls and you won't have enough customers, and no customers, no revenue, no company. Right? But I'll go one step further, which is to say that if you don't understand how to do that, how on earth can you hire the right salesperson to sell for you? So odds are that they're going to get hired. So if you do the normal path, at some point you hire a salesperson. If you follow the standard pattern of startups, you will not have the sales that you had projected. So you put down on paper in your financial model that you were going to do, let's just say 1,000 units, and let's say you sell 800. What was the problem? Did you hire the wrong salesperson? Did you do the wrong marketing? Or did everything go right and you were just wrong when you put down 1,000 in your spreadsheet? That the actual number should have been 800. You don't know. And so, if you don't understand sales, it's really hard to analyze. And the same is true for everything else on that ring. So how do you know if the accountant did a good job if you don't know about accounting? How do you know if the financial projections are good if there aren't your financial projections and so forth? And so I use this. It's sitting online. It's on my website. It's free. You can download a spreadsheet and fill out your own. And this is what real people look like. They're pointy. Because the education system in this country and every other country asks you to specialize. Who here has a degree in generalization? Right? They don't offer that. Yeah? They don't even offer, I think there's now an undergraduate degree in entrepreneurship, but the curriculum isn't these 7 topics. Right? They'll push you down the business side and teach you all about business and some of these, but I've never seen a class in sales in any school, any accredited school. It's just not a taught topic. And I do get some pushback on this. They say, yeah, but it's all about the team, right? So what about the team? Maybe the team fills in all the topics. And so I've been tracking teams now. So that's an actual picture of an actual team. They each filled it out, and then we made it transparent so you can see 3 different colors and how they cover it. And so maybe that's a reasonable path forward if you're pointy. And again, almost everyone's pointy, is find some co-founders, and between all of you, cover all the topics. What I tell my students to do, and I tell my fledglings to do, fledglings are the guys in Fledge, the guys and women in Fledge, is whatever you're short on, work on that in the midst of the program, right? Don't run with the stuff you're good with. Focus on the stuff you're not good with, right? And try and make it better. To teach this material, in the intro you heard about this, I wrote a bunch of books. First one I wrote when I was sitting as a brand new entrepreneur in residence in this program, because I just kept meeting people who didn't understand like the steps needed to take your idea and turn it into an actual company. All right, so it's easy to come up with the idea. It's easy to come up with a description of the customer, although we had trouble with that a lot. But all the other pieces, how do you create a financial model? The fact that you have to create a financial model. How do you create a sales plan and a marketing plan, right? There's a whole lot of steps needed, not just those 7, in order to get going. And so that book got written back in 2011. And then since then, I've just been filling in the details of all of them by writing more books. And it's a la carte because people are pointy. So if you already know marketing, I don't make you buy the 80 pages on marketing. They're all thin, too. They're all on Amazon. Right, so Seattle company, support your local struggling startups. They have a great self-publishing system, so I don't have to deal with publishers. So they're all exclusively in paperback and Kindle on Amazon, and you can come to my website to preview all the books. I also just wrote a new one, so there's now actually 8 in the series. I put down my thoughts on how to teach entrepreneurship, and it starts out with that theory of the 7 topics, and specifically what gets covered in each of the 7 topics, and then rants about business plan competitions and other forms of startup help. And the punchline of the book is everything helps. This is helpful, hopefully. This is helpful to the audience. It's not as helpful in a given hour as some of the other programs, right? But they can't all be the super high-end programs that make you do work every day for 10 weeks. All right, there's also a ton of help out there. So if you're looking to start a startup or you're looking to help the startup you already have, I just went to the internet and asked for a list of startup programs, and I got this map. Just notice, it's 7,000 programs on the west coast of the U.S., right? And 7,000 on the east coast of the U.S. There is a ton of programs out there to help. So look beyond the walls of the University of Washington. look within and then without the walls of the University of Washington. Downtown, we have a ton of different events and programs and whatnot to help startups. Just Google will find them for you. The other thing that I've found is extremely helpful and really hard to find are mentors. And I'm using the term of art mentor as defined by Techstars, which is anyone who helps. Any experienced business person who's willing to give you a half hour or more of their time is what we call a mentor, right? Used to be that a mentor was someone who was willing to like have coffee with you once a month or once a quarter. We don't have a term for that. That's still a mentor too. But what we do at Fledge, which is again a copy of Techstars, is that we flood our teams with mentors. We have 15 or 20 people meet with each of our entrepreneurs, and then something magic happens when that occurs, which is that they discover that the mentors don't know more than they do. They discover that the advice they're getting when they meet 10 people on a specific topic is 10 different opinions, most of which conflict. Right? So you as the entrepreneur know your business better than anyone else. Right? Unless you're totally copying someone completely in the same market and competing with them, the mentors know less than you do. And by having all these opinions, you get two things. One, you get some ideas that you wouldn't have thought of, because if you get good mentors, they are smart. But two, you discover that you have to make your own decision, and you just have this pile of opinions to work off of. The only place I've seen where you get that kind of experience with 10, 20 people battering you with opinions is inside accelerators. So if you do the business plan competition, they'll give you a coach or two. That's helpful. If you do the Environmental Innovation Challenge or the Business Plan Competition or the Health Innovation Challenge, you'll get feedback from, it could be 40 or 50 judges. That's helpful. It's just even more helpful when you have more face time with more people who can help. And so for those of you who are not in an accelerator, what I highly suggest you do is just keep at trying to get people to help you. Keep finding resources where you can ask people to have coffee with you to get your opinion. And keep doing that until it seems totally useless, right? Which should be around somewhere between 7 and 15 of those meetings, right? All right, the other thing we do very differently at Fledge than any other accelerator I've seen anywhere in the world, all those 7,000 other programs and whatnot, is that we do storytelling instead of pitching. So the orange book in my series teaches people how to pitch. I do coach at business plan competitions. I teach pitching a lot. But at Fledge, we go one step further and we do we don't do pitching, we do storytelling. And it's working as a technique. And storytelling is really about TED. Right? So I work with mission-driven for-profit companies, and because they're mission-driven, and I'll tell you about a few of them in a minute, they all have an interesting story to tell. Right? Sometimes it's the backstory of who they are, but mostly it's about that mission. And so we're able to put them on stage in just 5 minutes and have them make the audience want to know more. This is one technique that most first-time entrepreneurs don't understand. The purpose of a pitch is to get the audience to want to know more. And if you tell them everything you can without ever pausing, speaking for your 7 or 10 or 15 minutes as you're given, and just speak and speak and speak and throw all the facts you can at them, then they probably don't want to know more. And you're done. And then the next one goes up and they do the same thing and they still don't want to know more. By telling a great story, by watching how Steve Jobs did this, by watching the TED Talks, you understand that all you want to do is capture their imagination, capture their heart, capture their mind, and leave them hanging and have them want to talk to you and get more information. All right, if you want to see what this looks like in person, come to the Fledge website, click on Demo Day. You can watch 70-something videos now. It's 82 because there's 7 companies being incubated right now. All right, so a few good stories. Cotton, so every piece of clothing ever manufactured into the wee history, the unforgotten history of mankind, has either been thrown away or was destined to be thrown away. right? We produce $1 trillion worth of textiles into clothing every single year, and it all gets thrown away until now. So Evernew is a Seattle-based company that has invented a chemical process to recycle cotton. You can take all my clothes except my shoes, toss it in a vat, melt it back down, spin it back into fiber, turn that back into fabric, cut and sew it back into clothing. That's a picture of the first pair of recycled jeans ever. It was manufactured by Levi's, coming to a store next year. Okay. Here's a company, it started on Vashon Island. They dreamed of making cook stoves for, how to describe it? They dreamed of making cook stoves in Africa. Charcoal stoves to start with, biomass stoves eventually. 1 billion people around the planet cook on a 3-stone fire. A 3-stone fire is where you literally take 3 stones on the ground, put some firewood in between, or a chunk of cow dung or something that burns. Start a fire, put the pot on top, and cook dinner. 4 million women and children die every year because that fire kills them through smoke inhalation, right? Plus a few fall on the fire, but it's mostly the smoke. This stove doesn't have any smoke. So they dreamed. I met them at a coffee shop almost 6 years ago. They dreamed of making these stoves on the continent of Africa, which just wasn't done at the time. They now make 12,000 stoves a month. They're the biggest manufacturer in East Africa, if not the whole continent. I don't have the stats for West Africa. These 2 women are based in Peru. They make high-end women's clothing, but all that clothing is knitted or woven by women in the rural areas of Peru. All made with fiber, either alpaca or pima cotton that's grown in Peru. And then the products are shipped around the world, sold in high-end stores. So they're employing something like 300 or 400 women and growing, using traditional craftsmanship to make great clothing. So they're employing women who otherwise wouldn't have jobs. One didn't come out as good as it should. East Africa Fruits. They are the largest aggregator, processor, and distributor of fresh fruits and vegetables in Tanzania. The entrepreneur, when he was here in Seattle a few years ago, was 24 years old. He had saved up $6,000 of his own money to start this company, bootstrapped it. He's now working with about 400 or 500 farmers, including some co-ops. He's still dreaming of exports. We haven't got there yet. But he has increased their average income from $600 a year, which is the norm in Tanzania. I'll say that again, $600 a year is the norm in Tanzania, to about $2,000 a year. So he has moved 300 or 400 or 500 farmers into the middle class. Doesn't sound like middle class, but it is in Tanzania. Agora Piedra Mezcal. Mezcal is to tequila what whiskey is to what whiskey is to moonshine, right? So it's smoked. It's a high-end spirit. It's a traditional drink of Oaxaca, Mexico. And this company is based in Mexico, and they are using, they are employing people in Oaxaca and then exporting this product out to Europe and the U.S. to bring income to the second poorest state in Mexico. Shift Labs. She still teaches on the campus, I think, the founder of this company. Beth Conco, yeah. The Shift Labs makes this device. It's called the Drip Assist. The norm in the world for figuring out how fast an IV is dripping into the patient is to look at the drops and estimate. Next best is to look at the drops and read off your watch how fast the drips are coming. And the very high end, there's these things called infusion pumps. So if you're in a U.S. hospital and they really need to know how much medicine is going into you, they'll hook you up to an infusion pump. The pumps cost $2,500 a piece. So it's not affordable in most of the world. So they developed this product. It's less than $100. It clips onto an IV and it counts the drops. It tells you how fast the medicine's going in. So they sell this in the U.S. They sell this in developing countries, and they sell this in Kenya and Nigeria and India and elsewhere. Oh, keep going. This is Yusuf Tura. When he was a teenager, he lived, he's born and raised in Ethiopia. When he was a teenager, we don't know how old he is. When he was somewhere around teenage age, he got sent to a refugee camp in Kenya because there was an outbreak of communism in Ethiopia at the time. He was starving in Kenya because there was no food in this camp. He spent 3 years of his life there. And then Church World Services in the U.S. State Department decided that he should be an American. So they picked this kid up, 16, 15 years old. They dropped him off in Olympia. He learned to read and write. He got a job driving trucks and cabs and whatnot. He said he'd never go back. 2007, he went back. His brother was still there. He got to see him for the first time in a decade. And he was just blown away by the poverty that he had forgotten about, and said, I have to do something. So he and his brother started making cook stoves, right? Just funded from the savings of a cab driver. This company used to be the largest manufacturer of cook stoves in Africa before Bern came along. That is one of the stoves. They're all handmade. They're all made out of recycled parts. When I found Yusuf, they had already produced 220,000 of these stoves profitably. They're the only manufacturer of handmade stoves anywhere in the world that has ever sold more than 100,000 units. We actually don't know. We don't quite understand how it worked, and we want to replicate it. That's a challenge. All the escargot in the United States is imported in cans from Europe. We're trying to fix that. ArcLight, there's, oh God, what's the number? 300 million tons of plastic waste produced each year. Only 7% get recycled. The rest go to landfills or in the oceans or dumped all over the place. If you go to the developing world, you'll see plastic and plastic bags everywhere. ArcLight's based out of Argentina. They have a technique and a technology to take any plastic waste and turn it into artificial rocks. And those rocks replace the rocks we use in and under concrete. They're up and running in the market now. All right. So that's just a little handful of the 82 companies that I've got to work with through Fledge. The one thing that I'm able to sum up with, right? Sometimes I'm pressed, like, give me the secret of entrepreneurship. Yeah, that's the secret right there. It's not very secret. It's not. It doesn't sound very complicated, right? All you have to do is make something people want to buy, right? But you have to make sure that the cost of bringing that to them is higher than the cost. Lower than the price they're paying, right? They have to cover not only the price of the product. This is where people get caught up. So useful. All the underline is not everything you think of is useful. Not everything is something wants to buy. It may be useful. It may just not be useful enough to them that they'll care enough to buy it. Then you have to sell it at a price that covers not only the cost of that product or service, but also the price of finding the customer and getting them to say yes. Goes back to sales, right? So if 90% of your customers are saying no, then you have to cover the cost of talking to those 9 customers that aren't buying for that one that is. And that's the part where a lot of entrepreneurs get caught up. They forget that part. They go, well, it costs me $1, I'm going to sell it for $2. And then when they come in front of me, I go, that's nice, but it costs you $100 to find the customer. So it doesn't matter that they paid you $2. You forgot about the $100 cost of finding the customer, right? Let alone the $900 cost that you lost finding 9 customers who didn't say yes. All right, so I'll open it up to questions at this point. Good, Ryan.
So, from your experience of all these 82 companies, what's the one thing you think they could do to improve their chances of success?
Okay, so the question is there one thing that 82 companies could do to improve their chance of success, or in general? There is no one pattern. If there was, I wouldn't have to write so many books. That one statement is the best I have. So the most common flaw that I see in plans is not taking into account the customer acquisition cost is the common term, right? It's just assumed by most entrepreneurs, first time, never got any mentorship, that this is the best thing ever, that I have the best idea in the world, and therefore people will see it and notice it and find it and buy it. And that rarely happens. Most new products are not so exciting that customers are dying to have it. Most of them, you have to talk them into it. Even if it's solving a problem they have, you still have to talk them into it, explain what it is. Even if it's free, I've done a couple companies where the product was free, but we still had to like we had to get airplane tickets and get in front of these people and talk them into taking our product for free from them. Right? Sounds crazy, but that's what it often comes down to. And the same flip side comes when it comes to raising money. So every entrepreneur I've ever met thought that they had the best idea in the world, and that all these investors were just silly for not just seeing this and enforcing checks upon them. Yeah, that doesn't work either, right? In a second. Investors, investors have a lot of options. They see a lot of different plans. They see a lot of patterns. This is, a lot of what I'm showing you here are just patterns of startups. And so when I see a pitch, I can say, well, it looked like these 10 others I've seen before, and none of those succeeded. So why should this next one succeed? Why should this 11th one succeed where the other 10 didn't? And that's a incentive for me to just go on and look for the 12th one and the 13th and the 14th, because maybe we'll find a pattern that does match one that succeeded. Yeah.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but how do you stay sane between writing books, between doing these startups?
Oh, personally. Okay.
How do you keep it all? How do you keep it all together? Because startups traditionally have been known as, startups are high risk, high stress environments. You're usually dumping many more hours than you intended into them.
Yeah. I also note that Fledge is still a startup itself, and I didn't tell you about the other startup I'm working on. Personally.
Do you mind just repeating the question?
Oh yeah, the question is how do I stay sane with all this activity that was back on the bio slide? I actually only do one thing. All I do is help startups. So as of 2011, I shifted my career to help other entrepreneurs. And I have to start a company to do that, and I have to go get investors, and I have to do all the things that they have to do. But I've been doing that at that point, I had been doing it for 20 years, and now it's been 25. So those are things I know how to do. And all I do is find ways to help entrepreneurs, and when a new one comes along, I will shuffle them either into Fledge, if it makes sense, or some business plan competition or some other program in town, if it makes sense, or someone else's program, because I can't help most of the entrepreneurs that come to me, or I'll point them to a book, or I'll write a blog post about them, or I'll introduce them to a mentor or something. So what I've done is I've built a whole set of tools, right? I've embedded myself in a global ecosystem that helps startups. And so for any startup that looks sane, I can plug them somewhere into that ecosystem. And the ones that look insane, I stop writing to them after they stop listening, which is quite often actually. Yes.
Do you ever consult your startups on what to do with the product after it's been consumed? For example, two things: the recycling of the clothes, the chemical process they use. Are there any negative side effects to that process? And then another one is the plastic rocks.
Yeah.
Are there any negative side effects for leaching of any toxins from those plastics into the soil?
Okay, so the question is basically, are there any negative externalities to some of these companies I showed, specifically the cotton recycling and plastics recycling? So it happens to be that the entrepreneurs I work with tend to think through these before they come to me. So these are both the cotton recycling company is a cradle-to-cradle company. They want their clothing, once recycled, to come back. It's infinitely recyclable through their process. And no, their process does not have any waste stream. In the case of the plastics recycling, same thing. His environmental, he studied environmentalism. That's his background. The entrepreneur is an environmental consultant. So no, there's no leaching out of that plastics. Yes, we do worry about what happens when that concrete is then broken apart again. But again, it's in the concrete, and then it can be made into new concrete, right? Just like today, you can recycle concrete.
So when you talk about storytelling rather than pitching, what are some guidelines you like to, or some of your bullet points that you tell your companies?
Okay. So the question is about storytelling. So what's the keys to storytelling? Let's see. The way I usually describe this is that human beings have been telling stories probably since we could talk, right, or soon after we could talk. So we don't know how long we've been talking. we'll just call it 100,000 years, right? So thousands of generations we've been telling stories to each other. We're told stories as little kids, right? What you're supposed to do with the little kids at night, you read them stories or tell them stories before they go to sleep. So we understand from an early age what a story is, and a pitch makes a terrible story. It's missing all the fun elements of a story, right? So it's missing an opening that makes you want to hear the next line. So first thing that I teach people when we get to the storytelling part, which is not the first thing we work on, but first thing to worry about, is how are you going to start? You don't walk up to the, actually, you never stand behind the lectern if you can avoid it, right? You got to walk up to the audience, and you don't say, "Hi, my name is Luni, and today I'm going to tell you about startups." Is that interesting? Anybody want to hear the next line? Maybe that's why you came here, but you know, it's not terribly compelling. But when I step up and I say, just like, oh shoot, I'm trying to get the. All right, so let's. African chicken solves the problem, addresses the problem. African chicken addresses the problem of poverty, hunger, and unemployment through a chicken. Which probably in most of your heads is, how on earth did they do that, right? Try and get this one right. Access to financial services is a fundamental human right. So we have a line there that sounds controversial. It's not one that you normally hear or read about, and you want to know, well, what's that mean and how's that work? Right, so key line opener to pull the audience in and make them want to know what's going on. Right? When we do our storytelling, we then usually bring in a character, because stories have characters, and we don't introduce the speaker until about a minute or two into a 5-minute speech, because the speaker is the least important person in most of those stories. They're not the character in most of the stories. So, you know, hi, and somewhere in minute 2, hi, my name is Luni, and today we solve this problem with name of the company, and then the solution. Same thing, you have to have an ending. So the way I often describe this is, what happens in the pitches these days, you'll see this pattern a lot, which is, let me tell you about Bob. Bob is such and such, he's got this problem, we have the solution for him, and then Bob disappears from the story. Right? You get around to the financial model and whatnot, and you're not talking about Bob anymore. So how many, Pixar makes good movies, yes? They tell a good story? Yeah. We're going to introduce this guy named Woody, and then in Act 2, there's no Woody anymore. He's gone. In Act 3, he doesn't show up. The end of the movie ended, and what happened to Woody? We saw him in Act 1, and he disappeared. He didn't die. He just never showed up again. Yeah, that doesn't make a good Pixar movie. They never do that to us. Nor do they introduce a new character, Woody, in Act 3, unless he's the bad guy, right? Characters get introduced at the beginning of the story, and they stay throughout the story and have a character arc. Kurt Vonnegut, yeah, he's got a great video out on the internet if you haven't seen it. He says there's only 3 stories you can tell. Stories take a bunch of different forms. There's only 3 that really work. Man in Hole, Boy Meets Girl, and Cinderella. And then he diagrams them on the chalkboard, I think it was. I think only one of those works for startup stories, which is Man in Hole. Okay? Man in Hole takes a really simple form. You meet this character. Usually you meet them and then they fall in a hole. And then the story is how they get out of the hole. And then you're all happy because you like this character if it's done right, and they got out of the hole. Sometimes you start out and the person's in the hole already, and you do a little flashback to learn who it was. So starting in the middle of the story is often some way to get people involved as well. And the last trick on this that I'll cover, and I'm actually updating my book on pitching to include all this and more, is suspense. So go back, 2007, Steve Jobs, who was really good at telling stories, right, and pitching at the same time, got up and said, today we're going to introduce not 1 but 3 new products. Right? A touchscreen iPod, which was important at the time. I know it sounds stupid now. A touchscreen iPod, a brand new phone, and a breakthrough internet device. Pause. He paused. He stopped. He did not speak for the next 3 or 4 seconds. right? You actually go back and watch all his presentations. One thing that makes him so compelling is that half the time he's not speaking. He says something and he stops and he lets the audience have their little aha in their head. And before they start thinking, because you don't want the audience thinking, that's a whole other piece, then he tells them the next line. Right? So what was that big piece? And then just to fine-tune this one even better, he tells this and tells it and tells it, and they all finally get it. Okay, it's not 3 products, it's 1 device. And then he shows a picture, and it's a joke. It is an iPod with a rotary telephone dial on it. And they all laugh. And just to be clear, they didn't get the answer yet. They're still stuck in this spot that he's built them up to and hasn't given them the answer yet. Nobody at this point knows what this phone is going to look like. And he's got the most enthusiastic audience there is for something like this. And then finally he gives them the answer and then gives them the details and whatnot. So there's all this suspense that gets built up. And that's what's missing for most of the pitches is suspense, because most first-time entrepreneurs that I talk to want to tell you the next fact. They don't even want to stop and take a breath. They just want to get to that next fact. Okay, does that help? Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
How can a non-social good startup authentically infuse social good into their business?
Ooh, okay. So how can a non-social good business infuse some social good in the business? There's actually two definitions for social good businesses. There's how you run your business and what the business does. So, for instance, in the world of, for instance, there's a certification called a B Corporation. Right, so it's run out of Philadelphia, the nonprofit called B Labs, and they will certify that a company is B, right? B for beneficial. Companies like Etsy are B corporations, and Patagonia. Divisions of giant companies like Ben & Jerry's are B corporations, and then there's like 2,000 others. Fledge used to be a B corporation. Most of what they ask about your company is, do you use LED lights? Do you recycle? Do you have mixed genders on your board and ownership? Do you do an energy audit every year to see how much energy you use? What do you do with your community? Do you volunteer for your community? Do you give to charity? It's actually a very long list, like 200 questions. And part of the purpose of having such a long list of questions is to show companies what else they could do to be more beneficial to their workers, their community, and the environment. Right? And we see this in the public markets. There's a system of ratings called ESG, which is Employee Sustainability and Governance? Environmental Sustainability and Governance, which some of us question, but it's still there. So that's like how you run your company. Is the company itself good for the world the way it's operated? And then separately, does the company have a mission? And so there we can see like the difference between Amazon and Whole Foods when there were 2 separate companies, whereas Amazon was mostly focused, or 99% focused on that bottom line, or at least actually they were focused on the top line. Right? They just wanted higher revenues. They didn't care about profits. Whereas Whole Foods' mission was around bringing healthy food to their customers. Right? Bottom line be damned. Not damned, but bottom line less important. All right, we got time for like 2 more. Yes?
What advice would you give teams to actually build a good team that can succeed?
All right, so the question is, how do you build a good team to succeed? Every team that I've ever worked with or been part of has been happenstance. It just happened to bump into each other and had similar ideas, or went to school together, or in one case, my partner was my customer in my first company, and we liked each other. And we said we should do a company together. And we did. We did 3 companies together after that. Best way to both help your company and help your team is to just get out into the ecosystem and meet a lot of people. And you know, again, I used to be a software guy. That's not what we learned how to do when we were developers in school, right? Software people tend to be introverts. You gotta, and back then there wasn't an ecosystem to go into. All this stuff, all those 7,000 programs did not exist when I was a first-time entrepreneur. All of them didn't exist. But there are tons of programs out there, and there's tons of meet and greets and meetups and whatnot. And so go out there and talk about what you're doing. No one's going to steal it. Every entrepreneur already thinks they have the best idea. They don't want your idea. I've not once had anyone in any Fledged program or any other program I've had jump ship and join someone else's team. It has not happened. So go out, share, and you talk about it enough, and you hopefully will find a like-minded person. Startups are not easy. First-time startups are not doable by one person. I've seen stats. Apparently, that's false. Apparently, it has been done. It's really hard. It's a team sport. Yes.
At what stage do you advise the startups to go fundraising externally?
So the question is, when is the right time to raise money? These days, if you haven't had the guest speakers talk about the realities of funding, I have a book on that too. The reality is that there are very few seed capital investors. Right? Most of the investment dollars that you read about in the startup space are not for companies that are brand new with an idea or a prototype. Most of the money is for companies that have customers and revenues, which is a catch-22. How on earth do you get to customers and revenues if you don't have any money to build the product? The answer to that is go read the Lean Startup, and then read it the second time, and this time stop thinking about building part of your product and start thinking about some of the examples of not building your product but still testing your idea. What's hiding in there is the fact that you should just work for someone else and save up some money and spend your own money on the initial prototype to get the customers, because it's really rare to find someone who is willing to do that. If you have a product, you can do Kickstarter. It'll tell you whether you'll have customers. You can raise some of the money through that. Generally, you need what's called traction to raise money. And one more catch-22 is the traction is revenues would help. Customers is next best. Other investors is really important. So if you have customers and revenues and other investors, then it becomes easier to raise money. But of course, how do you get the first investor? So what I usually tell people to do in Seattle is just go out and talk. Use the network. Find people like me who'll do intros, and find an angel to start it off. And don't go to an angel group until you have at least one angel already saying yes. Angel groups are really good at finishing rounds. They're not very good at starting rounds. Yeah, this whole world is full of catch-22s. Yeah.
Just want to ask a question about, because Fledge is expanding, so just want to understand how you overcome cultural and legislative challenges as you move these startups into different countries.
Yeah, I get this question. So the question is, how does Fledge deal with differences in laws and customs in different countries? We've had almost no issues with that. There's a couple little tweaks. In Tanzania, you have to register the shares, and in Malawi, you have to register any debt. In Hong Kong, you had to register shares as well. Most of the countries that I've dealt with so far, most of those 22 countries are either former British colonies or simply use common law, and so the law looks pretty similar. We're starting to get to a few countries that are different, but we're just not seeing. Business seems to be business no matter where you go. We haven't seen a whole lot of differences, which makes sense, right? We have multinationals that. I think the multinationals might have fixed this for us ages ago. All right, and then last one in the back.
In the case where there's someone who has several ideas, how would you encourage that person to go about choosing one idea to really pursue? I'm asking for a friend.
Okay, so this gentleman's friend has too many ideas and is trying to narrow them down. Well, two techniques. So in general, even if you just have one idea, the technique I tell people to start with is opportunity size. So go through the exercise to figure out how many potential customers are there in whatever your market could be. Right? How many could possibly use this solution, regardless of how many you could get to, and go figure that out, and then put a price, just a rough price on what you think you can charge, and that gives you a number. Then do it again from the bottom up. So given the resources you think you can muster, how many of those customers could you possibly get to in years 1, 2, and 3? Right? So it's a bottom-up analysis of the same thing. Do that for all your ideas. See if one of them bubbles up. The other one I would do is just like put them all on index cards or Post-it notes in front of you. Take one away and say that one you can't do. I'm forbidding you from doing that one. See how you feel. Right? Put it back. Do it with the next one. Right? Someone mentioned this before. Right? So startups are all-consuming. I don't know anyone who's ever done a successful startup and had a second job on the side. Right? They're all-consuming. They will eat up your life. And I've been doing it my whole career. You can survive it, but they eat up your whole life. So if you're going to do a startup, then if you have a bunch of choices in front of you, why should you do the little one? Right? Do the one that has more potential. I used to say back when I was a techie, well, just do the bigger one, period, because if it's going to succeed, you'll succeed bigger. Now that I do socially conscious ones, I do the one that has a bigger impact on the world. So make your own judgment between balancing the financial gain and the gain to the world. But do the one that could be bigger, however you define bigger, because they'll both take the same amount of time. They'll both likely fail, right? Sorry, but they're both likely to fail. So you might as well spend the next few years of your life working on the one that could actually make a difference, right? And the only time I would have a caveat to that is if you have a small one that's, the corner grocery or the corner bakery shop or the corner, pet cleaning store in a neighborhood that doesn't have one of those, that's likely to succeed because we know how that business works. But probably no one in the room has one of those ideas because everybody always wants to make the new idea, right? New ideas are more fascinating. New ideas for, I have a rant on a blog post on this one. Every investor is crazy because every investor wants the returns that you would get from opening a bakery in a neighborhood that doesn't have a bakery, but wants it to be innovative and new and never seen before, right? Which is it's not quite a catch-22, it's just an oxymoron. Right? All right, with that, we'll wrap it up for the day. Thank you for coming. Thanks for listening to my stories.